In this tutorial we're going to go through how you can use Flask with Docker. We're going to go through how you can create an image, run a container, also how you can set up a development environment for Flask for quick iteration, and then we're going to go and deploy our Flask application on a DigitalOcean droplet. So let's get started. So the first thing you want to do is open Visual Studio Code and then go to File and Open Folder, and we will create a new folder which we will call Flask-Docker, and then if you click Select Folder, now we want to right click in here and choose New File and create an app.py file, and we can create a simple Flask application. Just something very basic, just to see how this process works. So we've defined a single function called home, and we've specified a root for that function, which is just going to be the default or home endpoint. So if we save that, and now we want to right click and create a Docker file, and we're going to use the Python 3.8 Slim Buster official image. Now we set up a working directory. This can be anything actually. I've seen this be just a basic code folder, but I'm going to use a fairly standard Unix folder to put apps in. And then we want some Flask specific environmental variables set up. Want to say what file holds our Flask application, so that was the one we just created, the app.py file. This is all fairly boilerplate stuff, but we also want to put this Flask app into developer mode, which means that Flask will look for any changes to files in the application and will restart the server if it sees these changes. Now we want to create this requirements.txt file in a second, and this will specify what we want pip to install, which is Flask. And we will ask pip to install what's specified in the requirements.txt file. And then we're going to copy everything from the working directory of the host to the working directory of the container. And once the container is run, the first thing it will do is do this command, which is flask run. Now we want to create this requirements .txt file, and we'll just specify Flask in here. Now if you click on terminal, a new terminal, let's build this image with Docker by doing docker image build, and I'm going to call the image flask-docker, and want to build everything in this working directory. So let's do that. So that image is now built, so let's run it. So if we do docker run, and we'll run it in detached mode, and we want to bind the host's 80 port to the container's 5000 port, which is what Flask defaults to using. And so we get an error here, which is cannot import name Flask from Flask. So let's see what that's about. And that's correct because I need a capital F there. So let's fix that and then save the file. And we have to rebuild the image. And then rerun the container using that image flask-docker. But as you can see, that container is already running, and I can see this by doing docker ps. And so I want to stop that container, so I can simply do docker stop, and then if I use these first three characters of the container ID, that's enough for it to know what container to stop. And now if I do docker ps, you can see there's nothing running, so I should be able to run the image again, and that is successfully running. And now if I refresh this, I get Flask with Docker. Now as you could see, it's going to be quite tedious to keep coming in here, making amends, and then having to rebuild the image and then rerun the container. That's quite a slow development iteration loop. So we can definitely improve on that, and we do that by creating another file, which is the docker compose.yml for YAML, and in here we need to specify a version number. Version 3 should do, and then we specify the services that we want to create, and I just have the one service, and I'm going to call this my Flask web service. You can call it anything you want. And what we want to do is build everything in the working directory. We can specify our ports, which are 80 on the host and 5000 in the container. But the most important part is this volumes, and this will create a volume which maps our host's working directory with the user source app folder inside the container. What that means is that the container, when it looks inside this folder, it won't be seeing the actual folder inside the container. It will actually be seeing this folder here in my host. And because Flask is in development mode, say when I make an amend to app.py, Flask will restart the server, the web server, and that should make for a much quicker development loop. So let's save that, and we want to stop our existing container, so docker stop, and in this instance it's 4a2, so that is now stopped. And then we can do a docker compose up, and I'll put a -d on the end there so it's detached, so that we'll get our command prompt back. And this will go away and create this service. And so if we do a docker ps, you can see that it's created a container and is running that service on the container. And if I go back and refresh, that's still working. But now the good thing is that if I go and make an amend, so let's just put a few more exclamation marks on the end here, and then Control S to save. Then when I go back here and do a refresh, we immediately see the changes. So that means that you can develop your Flask app nice and quickly. So now we want to actually deploy this Flask application, and one of the simplest ways to do that is to use Docker Hub. So if you go to hub.docker.com, and you will either need to sign in or sign up, and then once you have done that, if you come back to Visual Studio Code, and at the terminal if you do docker login, and since I'm already logged in, it's logged me in immediately, but you may have to put in your Docker ID and password. And now we have to build the image again, but this time we need to tag it and give it a repo name of your Docker Hub username. So mine is Morgan Page, and then the name you want to call the image. And so if we do that now and build that, and now we have our name on it, we can push it successfully to Docker Hub. So of course you will replace this with your name. And now that has successfully pushed that image up to Docker Hub. And if you log into Docker Hub, you can see that your image should be up there. And now we want to deploy this Flask application to a cloud service like Linode or DigitalOcean. So I'm going to use DigitalOcean. And so if you go to digitalocean.com, you can sign up. It will probably cost you about $5. And if you go to the main dashboard and click on droplets, let's create a droplet. So if you click on create droplet, and if you click on marketplace, You can see they have a handy one-click install here, so if we click on that, okay, it's not quite a one-click, but it's close. So if we come down here, we need to choose some options here. I'm going to choose the simpler one, which is password, but if you know a little bit about SSH keys, this is a better one to choose. So I need to specify a password here, and make sure you remember this. Once this turns green, it should be happy with the password you've chosen. And if you come down here and click create droplet, and so that droplet is now created. So let's copy our IP address, and if we go to the IP address, at the moment we shouldn't get anything because we haven't deployed anything yet. So let's go back to our terminal, and we should now be able to SSH using our root username and the IP address. Yeah, I want to continue, and then type in the password that we specified a moment ago. And now we're actually inside our droplet, and so we can do a docker pull directly from Docker Hub our image. And then we can run our image. Like so. And of course I've forgotten to put my username on the front, like that. So now if we go back and do a refresh, you can see we've deployed our Flask application and it is now running in the cloud.